Session 73 covers Anonymous Apex, specifically the Execute Anonymous window in Developer Console. This is one of the most practical tools in a Salesforce developer's workflow, and one that is often underused by developers who default to the full deploy cycle every time they need to test something. If you are currently deploying code just to test a SOQL query, this session will save you significant time. Execute Anonymous is exactly what it sounds like. You write Apex code, click Execute, and it runs immediately in your current org as your current user with no deployment required. No class declaration, no test class, no change set or metadata API call. The code executes in the context of a standard Apex transaction with all standard governor limits applying. To open it, click the gear icon in the top right of Salesforce Setup. Select Developer Console. Once the console is open, go to Debug, open Execute Anonymous window. A text editor appears. You type code directly into it. If you are using Visual Studio Code with the Salesforce extension pack, you can also highlight code in a file and run SFDX. Execute Anonymous Apex from the command palette. The syntax is Apex, but without the class wrapper. You write code as if you are inside a method body. Variables declared here are local to this execution. They do not persist between runs. You can call SOQL queries, perform DML operations, call methods on deployed classes, and use system.debug to inspect values. You can also use system.assert to validate that conditions are met, which causes the execution to throw an exception and halt if the condition fails. Your first Execute Anonymous script should be a simple query. Write a select statement against any object, assign it to a list, loop through it with a for loop, and system.debug each record. Run it. Then click on the log entry that appears at the bottom of the console. You will see a line for each system.debug call, prefixed with the log category and timestamp. This is your output. The debug log defaults to logging a lot of information, which makes it hard to read. Adjust the log levels. In Developer Console, go to Debug, change log levels. Set Apex code to debug. Set system to debug. Set everything else, database, callout, validation, Visual Force, workflow, to none. With this configuration, the log shows only what your code explicitly outputs and Apex execution events, making it much easier to find your system.debug entries. Reading the log. After execution, a new log entry appears in the Logs tab at the bottom of Developer Console. Double-click it to open. The log is a flat text file with one event per line. Each line has a timestamp, thread ID, log category, and event details. Use the filter bar at the top. Type user_debug to show only lines generated by your system.debug calls. This is usually the most efficient way to find your output in a long log. Governor limits in Execute Anonymous are the same as in any Apex transaction. 100 SOQL queries, 150 DML statements, 50,000 rows retrieved in total, 10 megabytes heap, 10 seconds CPU time. The limits are per execution. Each time you click Execute, you get a fresh set of limits. This is different from a Visual Force page session or a long-running process, where multiple operations might share a limit pool. One of the highest value uses of Execute Anonymous is testing a SOQL query before writing it into a class. Write the query as a standalone SOQL statement. Execute it. See how many records it returns, what fields are populated, whether the where clause is correctly filtering. If you have a complex SOQL with relationship queries, nested conditions, and an order by clause, testing it here first prevents a debugging session after deployment. The data fix workflow is another high-value pattern. When production data has an issue, wrong field values, missing lookups, incorrect statuses, the Execute Anonymous data fix is often faster than a data loader import and more precise than a CSV operation. The workflow is, first, run a select query to confirm exactly which records will be affected, check the count, inspect a few records. Second, write the update logic and test it on a single record using limit 1. Third, if the single record test produces the expected result, run on the full set with debug counts before and after. Here is a concrete data fix example. You want to update the billing city for a specific account. The first line queries for that account with limit 1 to get exactly one record. The second line sets the billing city field to the new value. The third line calls update to persist the change. The fourth line uses system.debug to confirm the ID of the updated record. This entire sequence runs in one execution, in one transaction. If any line fails, none of the DML is committed. Execute Anonymous can call methods on any deployed Apex class. This is useful for testing a newly deployed class method against real data before writing the full unit test. For example, if you have a service class with a method calculate revenue that takes an account ID, you can call it with a specific ID from your org and verify the result in the debug log. You get real data behavior, real governor limit consumption, and real output. System.assert is useful for turning Execute Anonymous into a lightweight testing tool. You can assert that a query returns at least one record, that a calculated value is within expected range, or that a method call returns the correct value. When an assertion fails, Execute Anonymous throws an assert exception and the execution halts, exactly like a test method failure. This makes it easy to run sanity checks on logic before formal unit test writing. Here is the assert pattern in practice. You query for closed-won opportunities. You assert that the list is not empty. If the assertion fails, the execution stops here with a clear error message. You then assert that the count is below 1,000, which would indicate your where clause might be too broad. These assertions run in milliseconds and give you immediate feedback about whether your query is behaving as expected. You can trigger batch jobs directly from Execute Anonymous using database.executeBatch. Specify the batch class instance and the scope size. The batch runs asynchronously. You will see it appear in setup under Apex jobs. This is useful during development to test batch logic on real data with a specific scope size before connecting it to a scheduled trigger. Monitor it in Apex jobs to see how many batches ran and whether any failed. For scheduled jobs, you have two options. The first is system.schedule with a cron expression. This creates a scheduled job that runs according to the schedule. For development testing, the second option is more immediate. Instantiate the schedulable class and call execute directly, passing null as the schedulable context. This calls your execute method immediately without the scheduler overhead, so you see the results in the current log. One thing to be aware of, Execute Anonymous runs as the current user, which means all object level and field level security applies. If your running user does not have edit access to a field, a DML update of that field will silently skip it. If you are testing admin level logic, run Execute Anonymous as a system administrator. You cannot bypass sharing rules unless the class being called is declared with without sharing. This is important when testing code that will eventually run in a trigger context, where sharing rules may or may not apply depending on the trigger's class declaration. What not to do? Do not run a mass DML update in Execute Anonymous without first querying to confirm exactly what you will affect. A where clause that is slightly too broad, for example, missing a date filter, can update thousands of records instead of the expected 10. In Execute Anonymous, there is no rollback on success. If the transaction completes, the data is changed. The confirmation query step, SOQL first, check the count, then update, is not optional for production fixes. Also, do not use Execute Anonymous as a substitute for proper test coverage. Unit tests with assertions are required for deployment. Execute Anonymous does not contribute to org-wide test coverage. Senior Salesforce developers use Execute Anonymous constantly. They use it to explore what fields exist on an object before writing a class. They use it to run the Query Plan tool, from Developer Console, Help Query Plan, to check whether a SOQL query will use an index. They use it to verify the result of a recently deployed batch job by querying records that should have been updated. They use it to clean up test data during development, querying for records they created during testing and deleting them in a few lines. It is the fastest debugging and verification tool in the Salesforce Development Toolkit. Session 73 is complete. The topics covered: what Execute Anonymous is and how it differs from deployed Apex, how to open it in Developer Console and read the debug log, governor limit behavior in anonymous context, testing SOQL queries before writing classes, the data fix workflow, calling class methods, using system.assert for lightweight testing, running batch and scheduled jobs, security and sharing considerations, and the common patterns senior developers use it for. The full article is at realsyllabus.com. Session 74 next. Upsert and merge DML operations in Apex.